Welcome to Show Me the Money podcast that's more fresh this week than financial ombudsman. I'm Ellie.
And I'm Claire. And each week we discuss how money shows up in some of our favourite pop culture, from the classic to the nostalgic to the contemporary.
And this week we are getting in a bit of a time machine and we are heading back to university days. I'm excited about this because it means that we can kind of reminisce about our own university experiences a bit as well. And we're talking about Fresh Meat, which is a TV show from, I guess, when was it? Was it the early
2012?
Yeah, it's like the 2010s.
Yeah.
So kind of the exact time that I was at university as well. We decided to talk about this for various reasons. A, because there are some really interesting themes that come up within it, but then also because the cost of university education is something that is like really timely at the moment. And there's a lot of news about it and conversation about it, which we want to talk about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just have such fond feelings about this TV show. It's created by Jesse Armstrong, who also created Peep Show and Succession, which we've also talked about this season. What it does really well is it's just so well observed. It has all of the mess left in. The dialogue is like so true to life. It's so like the way that we all talked to each other when we lived in in halls and then in a shared house. Like the concept of the show is exactly what happens at university in like halls and in shared accommodation, which is that just people from so many different walks of life all get thrown together and you just see what comes out of it. But I think that like your student days so often set the tone for your relationship with money going forwards, and you know what you go into it with in terms of like parental and family support quite often impacts like what you're going to come out of it with in terms of like student loans, student overdraft, all of that stuff. And so it's kind of the beginning of this almost like K-graph where your financial well-being as an adult is going to compound in one direction or another. So we have this like beginning, and then, you know, if you're getting things right and you've come into it with good education and you develop like good habits, then like the point at which you leave university and start earning is going to be the start of you like compounding your financial future in an upwards direction.
Yeah.
But if, like me, you come out of it with like a kind of difficult relationship with money and a massive student overdraft and loads of like student loan debt and like not a clue as to what you're doing, then it can compound in the opposite direction. We see examples of very different like or people with very different backgrounds going in and then really like struggling to find their way. But there's loads of really interesting like money stuff that comes up. I think, like you said, this is definitely going to be an episode where, you know, we reminisce about the TV show, but we all is also just such a good vehicle to talk about some of the really topical stuff that's been happening so far in 2026 with student finance and this big kind of reckoning that's happening with student debt, because for a long time it was just, we were sort of encouraged, I think, to see it as not being real debt, it's not going to have that much of an impact on your life. Whereas for me, like it's ended up having a massive impact.
One of the really important like things that has happened is like we went to university with Plan 1 loans. And again, as we'll talk about, one of the huge changes that happened, and one of the reasons I went to university the year I didn't wait a year, which I was tempted to do because I thought about having a gap year, was because Plan 2 was coming in and the tripling of tuition fees. But before we kind of get into all of the nitty gritty bits, then just to kind of set the scene for anybody that hasn't seen it, then Fresh Meat effectively follows a story of 6 students who are going to university in Manchester. It's a fictional university, but it's kind of mirrored based on Manchester Met. And they have applied late for accommodation. And so they have to go into a house share. And we basically, see the outcome of what happens when you just put these 6 students from different walks of life into this shared house off campus and like let them kind of run wild. And we see all sorts of things, like so many student issues. So we've got the money ones, but also the pressure of work, the pressure of studying, like partying, being kicked out, trying to think about like your career. And so as much as, again, it's like a comedy, there is a lot of relatable stuff in it as well, like that really kind of shows what the student experience is like. And I just have so many kind of like funny memories about like shared houses as well, and fond memories. And it's such a formative time as well. Like you're literally trying to figure out how to be an adult.
Yeah, and it's even accurate down to like the conditions of the houses that like student landlords let out as HMOs. I definitely like had experiences of this in second year, particularly. Like we had like what was a really good student house, but my bedroom was like the garage that had been converted. And my housemates bedroom was like a bit of the living room that had been cut off. Like and you know, we obviously see this, one of the reasons why. So we have the 6 housemates, who are Josie, who is a dentistry student, Kingsley, who's a geology student, Howard, I think, is a geology student as well. We have JP, who's Jack Whitehall, who is studying, I can't remember what he's studying. And then we have Melissa, or Oregon she is, but we find out that her name's Melissa later in the series. And then we have Vod as well. Yeah. Oh, how could I forget? It's Howard Ashton. And then there is like a 7th housemate, Paul Lamb, the Invisible Man. But he then leaves and is replaced by sort of like a series of people. You know, we see how their relationships form with each other. And there's this kind of like, will they, won't they romance between Kingsley and Josie that kind of comes from the fact that there is literally a hole in the stud wall between their 2 bedrooms that's been like plugged with like a wad of toilet paper or something. To me, that's what student accommodation is like. But yeah, we looked around terrible places. I went to university in Bath, where I still live. And because the city's on like a river and it is in like a valley, there are lots of damp problems. And some of the damp, like you could fit it, just the air felt wet in some of the places that we went to look around. But, you know, obviously that's an issue that kind of expands into like rental properties in general. But I do think student landlords sometimes are the ones with the most to answer for.
Proper cowboys,
Yeah.
And I think I was quite lucky, like, again, like in context, like with the houses that I lived in my student years, by no means were they like beautiful or anything, but they were okay.
Functional.
Yeah, compared to some of the houses like that I saw and like went round to and looked around, like really not good condition. And it's just kind of accepted because people are so desperate, like students are so desperate to get a house and accommodation, like so much competition for like good locations, that like landlords can literally just get away with absolute bare minimum.
And the amount of rent being charged, like, because obviously you can charge much more for a HMO than you could for like a family home of the same size. And that's one of the problems. Like we actually were still renting when we had a family. We bought our house in 2022, and up till then we were renting. And right at the start of 2020, we sort of made the mistake of like asking too much of our landlord because we wanted them to remove some nails from the floor. Just that little probe, they decided they were going to sell up, and obviously you only get 8 weeks notice. And so we had to find somewhere else, and it's so hard to the like provision of family homes on the rental market is so low, especially
in university city.
So we were really lucky. We found a great place that we stayed for 2 years after that until we bought our house. But yeah, it's really interesting. And then in the show, we actually see JP become everyone's landlord after the first season, because he comes from this like really privileged background. And I think he's a really interesting one to look at, because we have 2 very wealthy characters going in, and JP played literally like perfectly by Jack Whitehall, because I think he's basically playing
his
himself.
character.
And he is very open. He's like very sort of like really leans into like the posh boy, like silly posh boy sort of like persona. But his arc is basically he like becomes the landlord somehow. Then later on in the series, his father dies, and it becomes apparent that actually that there were lots of problems,
issues,
which is something that we've talked about earlier in this series. And then, you know, his family are kind of broke, but he does very badly in his degree. He gets a third. And then at the end is basically like, I'll just get a job at Foxton's because my family knows someone. And it just like, he's just really in it for the laugh. But then we have Oregon, who has like reinvented herself to come to university as this like bohemian. She's an English lit student. She has an affair with her professor, Professor Tony Shales, who then like stalks her. But she also is obsessed with his wife. And she goes out with his son as well. So she's like a
very straight
total mess. Played by Charlotte Ritchie, of course, who's like one of my favourite British actresses. She's hiding her background.
And I think this is probably actually in some ways, like I think she's probably maybe more reflective of like what you do see happen at university, especially early on, because I think people are really trying to like suss out everyone else. And it's like, you don't want to put all your cards on the table straight away until you figured out like who fits in where. And so I think there's a bit of that, but then there's also, like you say, this element of like reinvention and like wanting to have this blank slate and be able to just start over and be whoever you want to be, away from like all of the kind of baggage from school.
Yeah, and I do think it is like the way that people are thrown together is it's really accurate to my experience of going to university. Like it was a really diverse household in our first year of halls, which is obviously where you're all kind of allocated. And we had kind of people from really working class backgrounds, people from really privileged backgrounds, like people who'd come straight from boarding school, people who'd come from like a gap year where they had to work to earn enough money to like even come to university. So it was, I find it really accurate. And obviously Oregon's closest friendship in the house is with Vod, who is like a real like wheeler dealer. I think we learned that she's a military brat, but her mother's an alcoholic. She is like always like on the sesh. And it comes to light at some point, I think it's in the final season or maybe the penultimate season, that she's 70 grand in debt somehow. And that's kind of what makes her then finally take her studies seriously. And she kind of graduates with a 2-1 and goes traveling with Oregon. But I don't know how the economics of that quite work, but we'll give them some creative license. But she's kind of like, I guess, the opposite. And it's really interesting how like that friendship develops. As well.
Again, it's so fascinating when you kind of strip back like at university the experience of people being put together without really having that much context. And I guess the context is what you choose to tell other people about yourself. So you really can present yourself however you want to in a way. And at the same time, it's interesting, I think, looking back at like who I gravitated towards and who I just didn't. And I mean, admittedly, our course, there was some like strange characters. Like it was quite a strange mixture of people. So from my actual course, and I only have like one friend who is still like a very, very close friend. And like both of us don't really talk to that many other people that we studied with because they were all just quite odd. Maybe it's a languages thing. I don't know.
I mean, I literally married someone off my course, so I can't really, but the rest of them were like slightly odd characters. But yeah, well, similarly, like one of my closest friends, I did a different course from me and I only know them because we were put into halls together in the first year. So I think it is, it's
such a potluck.
It's such a potluck. It's so formative. It sets the course of your life so much. Like if I hadn't done a gap year, I wouldn't have met my husband. I wouldn't have like these specific children that I have. Like as we record, actually, my son is out in the lobby waiting for us. And he just would not exist if I hadn't gone to university.
Weird.
What that makes me really think quite deeply about is that I think the current student loans crisis and the current narrative around student loans and almost like some of the agenda that's being set in the media is like, it's discouraging people from going to university.
Totally.
Like, I genuinely think it's putting people off. I saw someone talking on LinkedIn about how a lot of their younger team members are saying they wish they hadn't gone to university. Yeah. Obviously we're living in a really different kind of jobs landscape now where AI is completely changing the jobs landscape. Some careers are maybe like losing value, other careers where maybe you don't have to go to university. So, careers where you're probably not going to get replaced by AI, like trades.
Yes, are becoming way more popular again.
Exactly. And so I think we're in the middle of a really big shift when it comes to university. But for me, I feel really sad, even though I've not really used my degree. My husband is insufferable in his ability to still speak both of the languages that we went to university to learn, but I have like forgotten most of it.
Yeah, same.
And don't really use my actual degree day to day. But the things that I learned at university, I think, were really invaluable. And I don't doubt that I could have learned them
other ways.
But
so much of it, I think, as well, was just about, like you say, the life experience. Like in the same boat, like I couldn't really think of any example of how I use my actual degree. I really have to stretch to try and find a practical application in my everyday life. But had I not gone, then like my life would not be anything like it is. Like I wouldn't have got the graduate job that I got, which is where I then met my husband. And like it would have just been a completely different world. Like I don't know what I would have done. But then also I think there's the context of like for our generation, it kind of was just a done thing. Like you just went to university.
Yeah.
There wasn't really another option presented on the table. And I do think it's a good thing that we're moving away from that, where there are more alternatives to things like apprenticeships and different routes into jobs. But I think the best situation really would be where it feels like a genuine choice, not being forced into it because of the costs. And I think one of the things that's so striking to me is that you literally, like in like the kind of discourse in the media about things like student loans, and it's so dominated generally by like policy that is pro older people because they tend to vote more. And you know that there's a problem when you start to see people in their like 60s and 70s talking about the fact that actually maybe we should revisit the triple lock pension because the students' loan crisis has got so bad. But I guess we should probably give some kind of context as to what we're talking about with this crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all come to a head basically because the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, announced a freeze on the repayment threshold. So in a similar way to how tax thresholds have been frozen, it should really be that as inflation rises, as things get more expensive, people have to earn more in order to afford the same lifestyle, which means that
wages are going to rise.
Yeah, wages will rise. And then the salary at which you start paying tax or start paying higher levels of tax should kind of go up proportionally. Yeah. And similarly with student loans, the salary band at which you start repaying your student loan should go up proportionally so that you can earn more to afford your lifestyle without falling into having to repay your student loan, which is at a rate of 9% per year on that additional money that you earn over the threshold.
And especially, I think, given that this is at the start of most people's careers as well. So like they are likely to be like not earning that much money. They are often going to be trying to like pay for accommodation, like get themselves on their feet in the job that they're doing or in the cities that they're doing. So we're not talking about like particularly big sums of money a lot of the time. Like, and we're talking about students or graduates who have probably got a lot of expenses going out, and they're really just trying to get like a foothold in the jobs market.
Yeah. And so this policy, this announcement has essentially been the spark that has ignited something that's been building for quite a long time. And all of a sudden there is interest and investment in the media in hearing these people's stories, people who are on Plan 2 student loans, it's kind of a perfect storm of things. So it's the fact that university fees tripled. You know, we're both lucky enough to have paid kind of 3,000-ish a year. They tripled to over 9,000 a year. So the loan in itself is much, much bigger, 3 times the size. But then with interest rates having gone up so sharply, what's now happening is that the size of people's loans, the size of the amount that they still owe on them is swelling much more rapidly than they are paying it off, even if they're in like a decent job. And so what we're seeing then is that people are just their student loan payment, rather than being something where you maybe repay it for the first 10, 15 years of your career and then you're kind of free of it. You know, we've discussed, I have got 50p left on my student loan, which I'm like almost putting off the gratification of logging in and just paying it off. I do need to do it. But that's because I had a couple of years where I earned really, really well and kind of paid myself quite a lot from my business so that we could buy our house, which then meant that I triggered the repayments. So I have had to pay a huge amount of my student loan off very quickly because I wasn't well paid before I became self-employed. So it caused like this real bottleneck where I was having to pay everything off really quickly. But now that means I've only got 50p left, and then I don't have to make those repayments anymore. Whereas like for my husband, when he finishes repaying his student loan, he will get almost £500 a month take-home pay rise.
Which is absolutely insane, because again, if you think about how much you'd have to earn or get as a salary increase to see that happen, it's huge. And again, we always kind of painted it, and Martin Lewis still does kind of paint student loans as like a graduate tax, which is an accurate, I guess, depiction, but it's something that we just accepted without really thinking how much impact it actually has. But that is a significant amount. And I think the other thing, just to kind of go back to the difference as well between Plan 1 and Plan 2, is that the way that the interest is calculated on the 2 loans is different, even before we then factor in the fact that interest rates have had a really rough few years. So with Plan 1, they are generally lower. So they have the lower of RPI or Bank of England base rate, which is 1%, RPI 3.2% at the moment when we're recording this. But Plan 2 varies between that RPI and RPI plus 3, depending on where you fall in terms of your income. But RPI plus 3 at times, as you said, like over the last few years, has been like 9-10%. And like that is what has caused this insane situation where people have loans of like nearly, 40, 50 plus grand, and then are getting charged interest of like 10% or whatever on top of that, which in Plan 1 just couldn't happen.
No, and so in actual fact, Plan 2 is much more of a graduate tax than Plan 1 ever was. Because it is something. Is it 30 years that it's written off after?
I think it is 30.
So, but that's 30 years of paying an extra tax, and
which are so unlikely with those numbers to pay off, because 9 plus grand a year in tuition alone, and then you've got a maintenance loan for a lot of students. So you're talking easily like 30, 40 grand for a 3-year degree, never mind longer degrees. And then you add the interest on top. So how are you meant to pay that off unless you're earning a mad amount of money, which not very many people will, in which case you're then stuck with this tax for your entire working career or the bulk of your working career.
Yeah. And, like I said, there's been a lot of talk about this in the media. Claire Barrett's written a lot about it in her column for the Financial Times. We'll link a couple in the show notes because they're really worth a read for to get a good understanding. There is a campaign in the Times as well. And I would really encourage anyone who's feeling this, anyone who is on a plan to loan, who is fed up, frankly, to go and seek out some of those campaigns.
Get involved.
And get involved and lend your voice. Quite often they'll do surveys. All of this helps to put pressure on because there is, I do think we are getting to a point where there should be a mandate to have some policy change around this.
Yeah.
And one of the things one of the kind of terms that's being thrown around quite a lot, which I do agree with, and it not just in regard to student loans, but in regards to lots of other kind of tax thresholds and, fiscal drag and all of that is tax on ambition.
Yeah.
And so, I think we want people to be ambitious in this country. I'm a lefty at heart, and I don't think that you should necessarily have to be super ambitious to afford a nice life. But I also do think that if you are ambitious and you would like to chase your dreams, that I think we have got to a point where the barriers to that are such that even the most determined person might get to a point where they think, what's the point?
Yeah.
This kind of is part, I think, of a wider reckoning.
Yeah.
But another thing that's being kind of floated out there is, apart from the is it fair, is this a mis-selling scandal?
Yeah.
Did students know what they were signing up for? And
I don't think they did. I really don't think they did. I think even now, 33, where we're talking about it from a context of working within the space of personal finance, it's confusing. Never mind when you're 17 and you're interested in what halls you're going to get and what you're going to do on Freshers Week. And you're there signing up to tens of thousands of pounds of future debt, which isn't really explained to you properly at all. I'm sure there were some T's and C's somewhere about it, but that's not good enough, I don't think. I don't think that there is enough, or was enough, I don't know whether there is still, but enough kind of clear education about this is your option. And if you choose this option, this is what it's going to mean for your, I guess, next however many years.
Absolutely.
And here are some examples of if you earn this much, then this is what it will mean. If you earn this much, this is what it will mean. Completely clueless, I think. And I think that sadly, benefits the student loans company and the government ultimately, that people didn't know what they were signing up for. And they're now having to deal with the consequences. And, it's earning a lot of money for the government.
And I think, there's always been this narrative that student loan debt in the UK is not as pernicious as it is in the US. And obviously in the US, it's treated as hard debt. People have bailiffs at the door, it is a different animal.
Yeah.
But
there's still a huge impact.
Yeah. And I think that we've diminished that impact for too long. And now it's really come to a head. Again, we just really see the impact of a lack of financial education in those early years, because obviously there's the student loan side of things, but there's also I only paid off my overdraft on my student account when I was 29. Because it's offered to you almost you just tick a box when you apply for your student account and, oh, here we go.
And you
Here's
also
$2,000
are always going to
free
get a
money.
student account because you got free rail card.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I did. I was yes, free rail card. So obviously I'm going to get the student account. And then they're oh, have an overdraft.
And it's 0% until you and then quite often you have a graduate account for a year and it tapers off. But then you're stuck with an overdraft that's where you're paying 40% interest usually. And so I think there are many ways in which people are just being set at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
As the moment that they step into further education.
Another one, which again is related to student loans, but is that how you get paid your loan, the maintenance loan. comes in like 3 blocks of like several £1,000s. Like that is not how the real world operates.
Oh my
and like,
God.
why don't they just pay it to you each month? Because like trying to manage or trying to get any 18, 19-year-old to plan and budget that across like the months that you've got to plan it for, like without any education, is asking for them to run out and it's asking for trouble.
100%.
And so I just remember being like, well, this is fun. Like I've got loads of money in my bank account and like, when's the next one coming? Like it's just, there's no guidance at all about how to do it.
Yeah.
And it's why I have always had quite an interesting perspective on this whole, like, when should we educate kids about money? And I do think that obviously there's a lot of groundwork that can be done early on, like, you know, from as soon as kids are at school, and I'm all for that. But I do think there's a really interesting kind of question mark about like whether you can expect somebody to leave school and go to university and like behave like an adult with money when the whole way that money works at university isn't set up like that. And if a lot of us are honest, did we care at university? Like, because I couldn't have cared less. So if you'd have tried to teach me how to budget my student loan, I'd have just been like, go away, like leave me alone. I think the point where I could have done with it was when I started my job.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, that is such a good point because a really old friend of mine, she won't mind me saying her name, I don't think. Shout out to Vicky. She has just had a baby, which is very cute. But she, at university, she had a spreadsheet that her parents had made her, a budgeting spreadsheet, and we all ripped the piss out of her. And then, you know, fast forward to a few years later, she's like absolutely fine.
Yeah.
She's like on like a really good path. And we're all sort of like still up to the hilt of her student overdraft. And I think, you know, maybe she is on something, but you're right. You know, like money is bonkers at university. And I still sometimes get that like fresh student loan feeling, you know, because obviously we as freelancers often get paid like big chunks of money. And I still get that feeling of like, oh, look how rich I am. And I just remember that so clearly. And I think the only thing that like saved me a little bit from that was that I worked in my final year of uni. And so I did have like a month.
Yes.
Well, I got paid weekly actually from my job. So I did sort of almost have that. Like I was, I guess, practicing in my final year. Not that it did me very much good because I still messed it up for the first 10 years of my like proper adult life. But I think, there's a lot, you know, and there are loads of organisations out there who are helping students to budget. But I think it needs to be a more like institutional thing.
And I also think we need to like engage with like the students and grads about like when the right time is, because as well, I did like, I studied postgrad as well. So I finished uni and then I moved home for a year. And then the wildest part was when I moved to London still as a student because to do my LPC. So I lived in London for 7 months and I had just been given like a one-off lump sum by the law firm that I was going to for that. And that was like the even more extreme version of it because it's like, off you go, like you've got to make this last. And obviously like it's still a lot of money, but it wasn't enough money. Like, so I still had to have help from my mum to actually like be able to afford to live in London where I had to live to do my studies for that part. But it wasn't until I actually started working when I was 23 that I really got into that cycle for the first time of like, okay, I'm on a monthly pay cycle. And that is the point I always come back to where I really think I would have benefited from being given a bit of structure to work with there. Like, and I know that for different people that is going to be at different points, but if you'd have tried to talk to me when I was busy buying like 5 dresses a week off Misguided and going out and like spending like £20 on shots a night, like at university about a budget, like I'd have just been like, nah, no, thank you. And like, it just wasn't on my radar.
It's almost as though in many, many ways, not just with money, but definitely with money, like the ideal would be to be able to treat like your time at university as like a mandala, you know, and it's like you start it and then you finish it and then you wash it away and then you start again with a clean slate.
Oh gosh,
but unfortunately, that is not how it works. It's not how it works for the fresh meat crew either. We see them all go off in different directions. Obviously, JP's got his job at Foxton. Josie having like drilled through someone's cheek and got kicked off her dentistry course, then goes and tries something else. And then she ends up like staying on at university after everyone's left. We see Vod and Oregon go traveling. Can't remember what Kingsley does, but he's like the most like screwed on character of the whole series anyway. But we kind of all see them like move on, but very much still dealing with the consequences of their time at university. And I guess maybe that's the most realistic part, is that like it's a demonstration of privilege to be able to start fresh when you finish.
For most people, there is like a continuation and like a very long one of those decisions or choices, or even like the decision to go to university that then can have a knock on for the next 30 years of your life financially.
On your payslip.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that has been so much fun to talk about.
I could talk about university days for hours, but
I'm sure we'll do another episode where we can reminisce some more. But we've got time for.
Yes, and we'll pop lots of the resources that we mentioned, especially some of the stuff around student loans and the campaigning, into the show notes as well, if you want to find out more.
Come hit us up on social media, please do. It's at Show Me the Money Official. You can also sign up to our Substack, which hits your inboxes every Sunday. We talk more about topical stuff like this, go a bit more in depth as to what the stuff that we talked about on the show. And drop us a DM if there's anything that you want us to talk about in future episodes. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.